Chapter 4. 1. Clark Kent moved with determined strides, his keen senses attuned to ominous new vibrations emanating from the ground beneath him. The air carried an unsteady hum that Clark feared was a prelude to something far more sinister. As he neared the site of Star Labs, his eyes caught a sudden burst of energy arcing into the sky, a bright, dangerous flare that painted a stark contrast against the afternoon sky. Around him, the city's heartbeat skipped. People stopped in their tracks, their expressions morphing from casual interest to shock. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as eyes turned skyward, witnessing the spectacle. Panic began to seep into the throng of onlookers. Clark hastened his pace, his superhuman vision cutting through the urban clutter to Star Labs. He zeroed in on the teetering reactor, dangerously close to collapsing onto the students below. Time was critical. He needed to find a way to grasp every detail of the rapidly evolving situation. Nearing the site, he saw the bustling streets transformed into an emergency hub. The block, previously teeming with city life, was now a sealed maze of urgent operations. Central to this was the Incident Command Center, a hive of tactical response and strategy. The command center was a collection of mobile command vehicles and tents, each a nerve cell in the body of emergency response, their satellite dishes tuned to the unfolding crisis. Tents fluttered slightly in the evening breeze, their flaps open, revealing glimpses of maps, monitors, and focused faces. Beside it, the evacuation control point efficiently funneled civilians to safety, while the nearby first responders area was a hive of activity. Firefighters geared up, paramedics prepped their kits, and police officers coordinated efforts. Access to the Star Labs site was strictly controlled. The Metropolis Police Department had cordoned off the area, setting up barricades that marked the boundary between public curiosity and official operations. Clark approached these demarcations, noting the crowd that had assembled. It was a mix of individuals, their faces a canvas of emotions, from the raw intrigue of the curious to the furrowed brows of the concerned. Among the bystanders, Clark's eyes fell upon a young mother and her distressed daughter. The girl, clutching a purple teddy bear, had tears coursing down her face, each one punctuating her fear. "Is Daddy going to be okay? Will they get him out?" she asked her mother, her voice barely above a whimper. The heartbreaking innocence of her question resonated deeply with Clark. Approaching the checkpoint, Clark sensed the crowd's anxiety. With his press pass in hand, he met the gaze of a weary officer who checked it meticulously. "The press area is over there." The officer pointed to a courtyard near the Incident Command Center. The location was strategic, offering the press a vantage point close to the heart of the action, yet safely distanced from the immediate danger. As Clark acknowledged the instructions, a sudden surge of vibration coursed through the ground. It was a deep, unsettling rumble that seemed to travel from the very heart of the earth, resonating with a foreboding intensity and drawing the officer's attention towards Star Labs. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Clark quickly moved towards the media liaison area. Within this communications hub, a stark contrast to the surrounding turmoil, reporters bustled among cameras and makeshift tables laden with equipment. A large screen displayed a live feed of the reactor. Behind, the Incident Command Center tent stood as a hub of coordination. Clark, amidst the flurry, absorbed the scene, his thoughts racing with questions and strategy. As Clark stepped into the media area, his exceptional senses immediately tuned to the Incident Command Center. It was a hive of activity, a strategic nexus where decisions of life and death were being made. Somewhere within, Commander Samuel Koza, the lead incident coordinator, would be orchestrating the response to the crisis. Clark knew that finding him was key to understanding the full scope of the situation. Utilizing his superhuman vision, Clark began a methodical search. His gaze penetrated the walls of the mobile command vehicles and tents with ease. It was like peeling layers off an onion, each layer revealing a new depth of activity and urgency. Clark's extraordinary senses were fully engaged as he surveyed the command center. He peered through the walls of a nearby vehicle, observing officers intently communicating over radios amidst a tense backdrop of voices. In another area, engineers and technicians examined the reactor's data on screens, their expressions a study in concentration. His vision adeptly navigated the scene, absorbing every critical detail. Around him, tents bustled with activity, each dedicated to a specific emergency role. Medical personnel in one tent prepared with a blend of urgency and professionalism, while logistics experts in another plotted evacuation routes amidst maps and charts. Clark's attention honed in on the main command tent, where Commander Koza, a pillar of authority, conferred with advisors. Disguised as just another journalist, Clark used his exceptional senses to eavesdrop on crucial conversations inside the tent, all while feigning focus on a laptop screen, seamlessly blending in with the surrounding reporters. Suddenly, a violent humming snap shattered the relative calm. Another arc of flaming energy erupted from the reactor tower, a fearsome whip of destruction. It struck the side of the Star Labs building, already ravaged by the earlier explosion. Clark's eyes followed the trajectory of the blast, watching as fresh dust and debris cascaded down. Quickly, Clark redirected his focus back to the command center, where Commander Koza's voice rose above the others. "We're out of time. If we don't get to those students immediately, we're going to lose our chance. It's critical we mobilize the rescue team now." A petite woman, her sharp eyes indicating a keen intellect, stepped forward. She was dressed in a lab coat, her posture authoritative as she addressed the group. "The immediate options are all too risky, Commander," she cautioned, "both for the trapped students and our emergency personnel." She turned her gaze to a man in his early 40s, smartly dressed. "Mr. Kim, our structural engineer, can give you the current situation." Mr. Kim, acknowledging her, cleared his throat and began. He pointed to a detailed sketch on the table. When the explosion occurred, the building's structural integrity failed almost instantly. He circled an area on the sketch. The main force of the explosion was directed towards the river, but it still resulted in the immediate collapse of multiple floors. His finger shifted to another part of the sketch. Here, a heavy steel wall and blast door prevented the concrete slab above from directly crushing the students. He then took a blank sheet, sketching a side cross-section. As he drew, a triangular shape emerged. "It's incredible luck," he said. The steel wall formed a wedge-shaped void. Had the students been anywhere else, they would have been crushed. Dr. Rivera, picking up where Mr. Kim left off, added her concerns. "We can't directly measure the reactor's output, but our mobile sensors are now indicating maximum heat levels. They're also picking up high-frequency resonances." A rugged, weathered-faced man contributed, his voice grave. "Dr. Rivera is correct about the heat," he said. "Our search and rescue teams have already lost 2 drones. They just melt when they get close to the reactor, and their circuits are frying." "Then lay it all out for me, Mr. O'Reilly," Commander Koza demanded. "What are all the options we have on the table?" O'Reilly's response was grim. "It's not looking good. None of the options are fast enough." "This is unacceptable," Commander Koza clenched his fists. "There has to be something we can do. We need options." O'Reilly glanced around the group, looking for support, then resumed. "First, we could try to clear a path through the building's rubble to the back of the steel wall. But it means erecting temporary shoring, creating makeshift tunnels as we proceed. Second, lifting the slab is another idea, but as Mr. Kim has pointed out, the slab's integrity is too compromised. Plus, the heat's too intense. The third option involves coming in from below. The server room right beneath them is intact, but all stairwell access to the lower levels is blocked by debris from the collapsed floors." Commander Koza, absorbing the information, asked, "Where are the elevator shafts in relation to the site?" Mr. Kim responded, pointing to his diagram. "They're here, on the opposite side of the former atrium." Koza decisively ordered, "Mobilize 2 teams to the elevator shafts. We'll rappel down to the server level." A seasoned firefighter, hair streaked with gray, interjected, "With respect, sir, that route takes us through the most intense heat, directly past the reactor. The risk from the energy discharges is too high. It's too dangerous. I can't send my men into that." Koza, his frustration boiling over, slammed his fist on the table. "If you won't issue the order, I will." Addressing the others, he commanded, "Get the team ready. They have 5 minutes to mobilize." The fire chief's face flushed with anger. "You can't dictate how my teams are deployed." Commander Koza cut him off sharply. "Yes, I can. You're relieved of your command here." He turned to the group. "Everyone, Let's move, now. As the group engaged in their urgent discussion, Clark's attention was abruptly diverted by another loud snap. His eyes, with their superhuman ability, quickly refocused on the reactor tower. He witnessed a large crack forming on the exterior shell. From within, a bright glow began to emanate, while on the outside, flares of plasma crackled menacingly, enveloping the structure in a dangerous dance of energy. 2. Lois Lane's fingers moved rapidly over her phone, dispatching the latest update on the Star Labs catastrophe to her editor. Just as she hit send, her attention was diverted to a familiar figure entering the media area. Her eyes narrowed in recognition. It was the young journalist from the press conference, the one who had first divulged the details about the students trapped in the disaster. Lois remembered his confident delivery, the way he had presented the information with a mix of professionalism and underlying concern. Turning to Jimmy, who was engrossed in reviewing the images on his camera, Lois nudged him. "Hey, Jimmy. It's the guy from the press conference," she said, pointing subtly in the direction of the young journalist. "The one who broke the details about the trapped students." Jimmy glanced up from his camera, following her gaze. "Yeah, that's him," he confirmed, squinting slightly to get a better look at the distant figure. There was a hint of recognition in his voice. Lois watched the journalist navigate through the throng of media personnel, wondering what new information he might have. "I've never seen him before. Any idea who he is?" Lois asked. Jimmy, ever resourceful, pulled out his phone and quickly navigated to an independent news site. "I looked him up earlier," he said, swiping through the screen. "Says his name is Clark Kent. He was, somehow, the first one on site, the first one to break the story." Lois's brows furrowed in thought. Her journalistic instincts piqued. Clark Kent. The name wasn't familiar, but his prompt presence at the scene and his scoop on the story were intriguing. "Let's go talk to him," she decided, standing up with a sense of purpose. Getting information straight from Kent could provide valuable insights for their coverage. As another vibration rippled through the ground, Lois steadied herself against the ominous energy pulsing through the air. People nearby flinched, visibly unnerved by the tremor. She exchanged a quick, apprehensive glance with Jimmy. They started to make their way through the crowd, aiming to reach Kent. But just as they were about to approach, he made a sudden move. Clark ducked under the police line and jogged swiftly between the command tents, heading into the heart of the restricted area of the Incident Command Center. Lois stopped in her tracks, taken aback by his boldness. "What's he doing?" she muttered, more to herself than to Jimmy. It was highly unusual, and risky, for a journalist to breach the restricted zone. Jimmy looked equally surprised, his camera hanging loosely around his neck as he watched Clark disappear among the tents. "I have no idea, but he's going to get himself in trouble doing that," he remarked. Lois's mind raced. Kent's actions were reckless, but they also hinted at a determination that resonated with her own journalistic drive. She glanced at Jimmy, a decision forming in her mind. "Let's see where he's going. There might be more to this story than we thought." With a shared look of determination, they cautiously followed, keeping a safe distance as they navigated the periphery of the restricted area. 3. The past few hours had stretched into what felt like an endless nightmare for Emil Hamilton. He couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. They were alive, yet their situation was dire. The space that trapped them, once a part of Star Lab's atrium, was now nothing more than a suffocating chamber of despair. After the blast, Emil had crawled to the back, leading the way in the dim and dusty enclosure. His hope of finding an exit there had been dashed. The steel blast doors, intended as a safeguard, now acted as their barrier to freedom. He had tugged at the doors with growing desperation, but they remained immovably sealed. The emergency controls were lifeless, unresponsive. Emil's gaze had turned to the glass shard protruding from his bicep, a grotesque sight causing his stomach to churn. He knew pulling it out was risky, so with trembling hands, he tore his undershirt, fashioning a makeshift bandage around the wound. Lizzie, the student with vibrant green hair, had followed his previous directions. Under his guidance, she had gathered the other students, her voice a calming presence amidst their collective fear. They had all maneuvered slowly to the back of their cramped sanctuary, the only place where they could find a semblance of space. Now, they sat lined against the steel wall, a row of huddled, anxious figures. The air around them grew increasingly hot, a relentless heat that seemed to emanate from the reactor itself. The temperature rose steadily, turning their confined space into an unbearable oven. Emil's throat was dry, his lips cracked from the lack of water. He feared what the escalating heat meant. Was the reactor reaching a critical point? In the stifling darkness, Emil grappled with their dire situation. The initial relief of surviving turned to dread as vibrations beneath them grew, signaling potential danger. Intermittent jolts shook their enclosure, with the ominous sound of creaking concrete and a steady fall of dust adding to their anxiety. To conserve what little battery life remained in their cell phones, they had collectively decided to keep the screens off. The darkness around them was occasionally broken by the soft sounds of weeping, the emotional strain too much for some of the students. To combat the growing sense of despair, Emil had suggested they distract themselves by talking. Lizzie, ever resourceful, had proposed a simple yet intimate activity, sharing personal stories. One by one, in hushed voices, they recounted tales from their lives, each narrative a brief escape from their grim reality. As the students took turns speaking, Emil's mind raced for solutions. Over 4 hours had passed since the explosion, and no rescue had come. The possibilities were bleak. Either they were undiscovered or, worse, deemed unreachable. Despite his intelligence, Emil felt powerless, a rare and unnerving sensation for him. His thoughts drifted to the alien ship housed in the lab, likely shielded deep below from the havoc above. To Emil, it was more than just a project. It represented years of dedication and discovery. The urge to check on its condition, to ensure its safety, gnawed at him. It was a strange juxtaposition, his concern for an inanimate object amidst the very real human plight surrounding him. Emil felt a sudden change as a profound silence fell over the group, halting their stories and leaving a thick atmosphere of fear in its wake. He refocused, attuning himself to their immediate surroundings, and immediately understood the cause of their dread. The vibrations, once a distant and unsettling background presence, had transformed into erratic, violent tremors. They came in sporadic bursts, each more unpredictable and intense than the last. The ground beneath them shuddered with a raw, frenzied energy, as if the very earth was rebelling against its constraints. Above them, something insistent and powerful seemed to be assaulting the concrete slab that kept them sealed in this hellish predicament. In the oppressive darkness, Emil could discern the ominous emergence of massive cracks. Each new fissure was a visual echo of their peril, a spiderweb of terror spreading across their makeshift ceiling. The slab shifted ominously, grinding and splintering as it pressed inward. Its groans under the strain mirrored the terror among Emil and the students, all breathing quickly and shallowly, facing the stark reality of being trapped under its crushing weight. 4. From the edge of the staging area, Clark keenly observed the fervent activity. Firefighters, their expressions set in determination, efficiently maneuvered through the area, carrying equipment as commanders directed them in a tightly choreographed routine. EMS workers rapidly attended to the injured, their swift movements reflecting both skill and care. The buzz of urgent discussions and the constant crackle of radios filled the air as medical personnel and responders coordinated efforts around tables and stations, preparing for more casualties. At one of the stations in the heart of the staging area, Clark's attention was drawn to a group of firefighters. They were just coming off what looked like a grueling shift, the toll of their work evident in their weary steps and dust-streaked faces. As they began to shed their heavy gear, Clark noticed an opportunity. Adopting the demeanor of someone who naturally belonged in this environment, he slipped seamlessly into the role of a volunteer. He had observed others assisting the first responders and now mirrored their actions. Swiftly, he grabbed several bottles of water and made his way towards the firefighters. As Clark neared the group, he extended the water bottles with a quiet nod of respect. "Looks like you could use these," he said, his tone casual yet sincere. A firefighter with lines of exhaustion etched into his face took a bottle, his eyes meeting Clark's. "Appreciate it," he said, a hint of a weary smile on his lips. "It's a tough one today." "Can't imagine what it's like in there," Clark remarked, handing out another bottle. "It's part of the job," the firefighter replied, unscrewing the cap. "We train for it, but yeah, some days are harder than others." Clark nodded. "Just wanted to say, your work doesn't go unnoticed." "I just wish we could reach that man on the 5th floor," he sighed, pausing to take a long drink from the water bottle. Clark's interest piqued. "There's someone still in the building? Apart from the students?" "Yes, he's trapped," he confirmed. "The stairwells on his floor are gone. He's got no way to escape, and we can't reach him from here." Clark's gaze shifted to the remnants of Star Labs. Utilizing his extraordinary vision, he scanned through the remains of steel and concrete. He quickly located the man, huddled in a corner on a mostly demolished floor. The man's safety hung in a precarious balance. Any further destabilization, especially a reactor meltdown, would put him right in harm's way. While Clark focused on the man, the reactor unleashed a ferocious flare of energy. It was a blinding plasma-filled spectacle, reminiscent of a solar eruption. The building responded with a chorus of groaning metal, echoing the energy's brutal impact. The flare violently struck the building, avoiding the man's level by mere chance. Clark struggled to maintain his outward composure. He nodded to the firefighter, his voice earnest. "Thanks for what you're doing. Stay safe out there." "We will, thanks," he replied, taking another long swig. As the group dispersed, a sense of mutual respect hung in the air. Clark watched them for a moment longer, acknowledging their bravery. Clark's eyes fixed on the turnout gear laid out by the firefighters. The pants and jacket were made of a heavy navy blue fabric, designed to resist the intense heat of fires. The material, a blend of Nomex and Kevlar, could withstand extreme temperatures, protecting the wearer from the direct flames and radiating heat. The fabric's unique weave also allowed for breathability, crucial in the sweltering environment of a fire. Clark thought back to the fire at the retirement home 10 years ago. The flames had been so ferocious that they had incinerated his clothes. Wearing this turnout gear, he wouldn't have to worry about such exposure. More importantly, it might allow him to blend in seamlessly with the other rescuers, giving him the cover he needed to use his abilities discreetly. As the group of firefighters drifted away, seeking rest after their exhaustive efforts, Clark found himself momentarily alone with the gear. He quickly scanned his surroundings to ensure no one was paying attention to him. Satisfied he was unobserved, he reached for the gear. In a fluid, almost imperceptible motion, he picked up a complete set of the turnout gear: pants, jacket, helmet, boots, and oxygen tank. With his superhuman speed, Clark vanished in a blur, the gear now in his possession. 5. Fully dressed in the firefighter's gear, Clark cinched the boots tight and adjusted the helmet over his head. He stood in an alleyway at the edge of the disaster site, aware that his next actions would irrevocably alter the course of his life. Images of Ma and Pa Kent flashed through his mind, their words of caution and love echoing in his memories. His thoughts then turned to the students buried beneath the rubble. Their plight fueled his resolve. He also considered the firefighters, their bravery in the face of such peril serving as an inspiration. They were out there, on the front lines, risking everything. Clark's superhuman sight pierced through the wreckage of Star Labs. He could see the students gathered closely, leaning against the steel blast wall with expressions of fear. Outside, firefighter crews had navigated the hazardous landscape, edging closer to the reactor tower that loomed ominously. At the elevator shaft, they worked tirelessly to pry open the doors. From his vantage point, Clark watched their futile efforts. He could see beyond the immediate barrier. The elevator car was stuck below, and the shaft was choked with debris. It was a dead end, and time was rapidly running out. The ground shuddered violently beneath Clark's feet as another tremor hit, causing the reactor tower to lean precariously. It teetered dangerously, catastrophe imminent. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Clark broke into a jog, heading straight for the reactor. His resolve was set, each step a commitment to the action he was about to take. Amidst the chaos, his superhuman hearing picked up the urgent commands being exchanged. The firefighting crew leader's voice was clear, laced with concern. "We need to regroup," he yelled. "There's no way down from here. Head back out." Commander Koza's voice crackled over the radios, firm and insistent. "No," he countered. "This is our only option. You have to make it work." Before anyone could react, a massive vibration tore through the ground, the energy from the reactor pulsing in a chaotic display of arcs and whips. The energy lashed out, untamed and wild, threatening everything in its vicinity. Clark's eyes remained fixed on the unfolding scene as he continued his run. He saw the crew leader, amidst the chaos, signaling his team to retreat. The urgency in his gestures was unmistakable. They needed to move, and quickly. As the crew neared the reactor, a massive shock wave burst forth, toppling all of them. Clark saw the firefighters struggle to stand on the shifting, unsteady ground, a grim chorus of concrete and rubble resounding beneath them. Clark quickened his pace, knowing that every second counted. As Clark hastened towards the scene, he began to speed up such that time seemed to warp around him. The world shifted into a surreal tableau, every detail vivid and pronounced. Moving at this super speed, reality stretched and contorted, slowing to a near standstill. The chaotic scene transformed before Clark's eyes. The crackling arcs of energy from the reactor, which had been violently pummeling the ground, now moved in a hauntingly beautiful slow motion. Each arc twisted and turned through the air, a deadly dance of light and heat captured in a moment of terrifying grace. The firefighters, caught in the midst of their frantic efforts, appeared almost statuesque. One was reaching out towards their trapped comrade, his expression etched with fierce determination and fear. The movements of the crew, desperate to free the pinned firefighter, were like a series of frozen vignettes, each gesture exaggerated in the elongated seconds. In stark contrast, a deadly flare of energy was bursting towards the crew. In the slow-motion world that Clark now perceived, it was a cascade of incandescent light, creeping ever closer to the vulnerable team. Clark, moving at a speed that transcended the normal flow of time, approached the scene with a precision that defied physics. His every step was calculated, his mind processing the situation with a clarity that only his extraordinary abilities could afford. In a blur of motion, Clark positioned himself between the oncoming flare and the firefighters. His body became a barrier, muscles tensed and fists clenched as he braced for impact. The solar energy from the reactor, a lethal burst of power, collided with him. A direct hit to his chest. Just a dozen feet away from the firefighters, Clark felt the immense force of the energy push against him. His boots dug into the unstable ground, anchoring him against the onslaught. The energy, which would have spelled certain doom for the crew, reflected off him. His presence there was their salvation. As he turned towards the crew, their faces were etched with astonishment. Time seemed to resume its normal pace, their expressions shifting from shock to comprehension. Without wasting a moment, Clark sprang into action. He effortlessly lifted the heavy concrete chunk, freeing the trapped firefighter. As he gently set him on his feet, the others quickly came to aid their comrade, supporting him on either side. "Go," Clark commanded, his voice resolute. "Get out of here. I'll get the students out." His eyes met theirs, conveying an unspoken promise. "You have to trust me. Don't come back out here." His tone left no room for argument. As the firefighters retreated to safety, Clark's focus shifted up to the silhouette of the desperate man trapped on the 5th floor. He squared his shoulders, readying himself, and began to move. 6. Lois, her pulse racing, stood tucked away in an alleyway with Jimmy, their eyes fixed on the chaotic scene at the devastated Star Labs site. The site was a tableau of destruction that stretched before them, stark and grim. She had followed Clark into the restricted area, but amidst the labyrinth of mobile command vehicles and tents, he had vanished from her sight. She and Jimmy had been navigating a delicate path, searching for Clark while simultaneously evading the watchful eyes of the police. As they had carefully moved through the shadows, Lois caught sight of a lone firefighter emerging from the alley where they now stood. The figure, clad in full gear, had begun a determined jog towards the reactor, its towering silhouette against the sky warped and menacing in the aftermath of the disaster. Lois's mind reeled, struggling to process the extraordinary sequence of events that had unfolded next. The lone firefighter had suddenly accelerated with a speed that defied logic. He moved like a blur, intercepting the lethal energy flares from the reactor with an ease that seemed beyond human. Then, with a show of strength that was inexplicable, he lifted a massive block of concrete as if it were a mere pebble. As the firefighting crew hastily retreated to safety, supporting their injured colleague, Lois's attention was riveted to the lone figure now standing amid the rubble. He turned, his gaze lifting to the upper floors of the scarred looming structure of Star Labs. Following his line of sight, Lois's eyes widened in horror and realization. High above, on a precariously damaged floor, a man was visibly trapped, his body language one of utter terror and despair. Lois raised her hand, about to point out the scene to Jimmy, but she saw he was already steps ahead. His camera, equipped with a telephoto lens, was trained on the dramatic scene, capturing each heart-stopping moment. She watched, breathless, as the lone firefighter's gaze seemed to lock onto the trapped man. Lois's eyes widened in disbelief as the firefighter, who moments ago had defied belief with his strength, now challenged the very laws of physics. He crouched slightly, his posture coiled like a spring, and then, in a breathtaking display, he launched himself upwards. It was a leap beyond any normal human capability, a graceful defiance of gravity. He soared upwards, not falling back to the ground, but ascending higher and higher. Lois stood frozen, her mouth agape. It was a sight both magnificent and utterly implausible. Her heart raced, her mind struggling to reconcile the impossible scene unfolding before her. The very idea that someone could just fly was impossible. Yet here it was, happening in reality. Another violent tremor shook the ground, and bursts of energy flared dangerously around the trapped man's precarious perch. Lois was so captivated by the spectacle above that she barely registered the ground shaking beneath her feet. "Are you getting this?" she managed to utter, her voice a mix of awe and urgency, without tearing her eyes away from the sky. "I'm getting it all," Jimmy confirmed, his camera diligently clicking away. The firefighter glided towards the trapped man, with a precision that defied explanation. He reached out, his arm extended, and in a fluid motion, he lifted the man into his arms. Without a moment's hesitation, he then arced upwards, soaring high above the reactor's threatening glow. Lois watched, spellbound, as the figure in the air carried the rescued man with an effortless grace, moving away from the danger zone. Then, with a controlled and gentle descent, he headed towards the evacuation control point. In that moment, Lois knew she was witnessing a defining moment in history, a feat of heroism that transcended human limits. Her mind raced, thoughts of who this firefighter could be swirling in her head. 7. Clark's boots made a soft landing within the evacuation control point. He carefully set the rescued man on his feet and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "These good people will take care of you now," he said, nodding towards the EMS workers who quickly approached to attend to the man. Just then, Clark's attention was drawn by a burst of movement. He looked up to see a little girl, the one he had noticed earlier with her mother, dashing towards them. Her purple teddy bear was clutched tightly in her hand, her mother trailing behind. The recognition was instant for Clark. They were the same pair he had seen at the barricade. The little girl, with an outpouring of emotion, leapt into the man's arms. Her tears flowed freely, each drop reflecting the overwhelming relief washing over her. She clung to him, her small arms wrapping around him as tightly as they could, as if she never wanted to let go. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," she repeated, her voice choked with sobs. The man held his daughter tightly, burying his face in her hair, the relief in his quivering embrace evident and profound. Suddenly, the ground trembled with a hollow thud, escalating into a deafening boom. Clark's gaze snapped towards the reactor core, witnessing its catastrophic disintegration. The structure's precarious angle had worsened, teetering dangerously past the point of no return. With a stomach-churning inevitability, the reactor began its descent. Clark's voice, amplified through his firefighting helmet, rang out with urgency. "You need to get out of here," he shouted to the crowd at the evacuation control point. The meltdown has started! Pandemonium broke out as people heeded his warning and scattered. Clark wasted no time. He leapt into the air, propelling himself towards the collapsing reactor tower. Mid-flight, he glanced back, catching sight of the father scooping up his daughter. They ran, dodging the deadly energy arcs that struck around them in a terrifying barrage. Amidst their frantic escape, the girl's purple teddy bear slipped from her grasp, tumbling into the debris. Yet stopping for even a second to retrieve it would have been too dangerous. Clark surged forward, his body cutting through the air with purpose. He observed 2 of the reactor tower's 4 support struts had snapped, unable to bear the structure's weight. In a rapid response, he positioned himself above the tower. With arms outstretched and muscles taut, Clark caught the top of the tower, exerting his full strength to push it back into an upright position. His movements were a blur of speed and power as he struggled to stabilize the precarious structure amidst the chaotic rubble and twisted metal. Hovering mid-air, Clark was acutely aware of the searing heat emanating from the reactor. Despite his immunity to the scorching temperatures, he knew it posed a lethal threat to everyone else. In a calculated move, Clark pulled back the visor of the firefighting helmet, exposing his eyes to the open air. Suspended there, holding the teetering tower aloft with one hand, he prepared to use one of his most formidable powers. He focused intently on the points where the metal struts of the tower had given way. Inside him, a familiar sensation began to build. The potent energy of his heat vision, ready to be unleashed. The importance of this moment was not lost on him. Precision would be key. With a determined squint, Clark directed a concentrated beam of intense heat from his eyes. The beam, a vibrant and fiery line, cut through the air, striking the damaged struts with laser-like accuracy. The steel began to glow red-hot under the assault of his vision, the torn edges starting to melt and fuse back together. Clark methodically traced the beam along the seams of the broken struts, his eyes moving with surgical precision. The metal yielded to his gaze, welding seamlessly under the intense heat. He worked quickly yet carefully, ensuring that each piece melded perfectly back into place. As the last of the struts were securely reattached, Clark's heat vision ceased. He glanced around, ensuring the stability of the tower. Still hovering, he realized the hastily welded struts were a short-term fix, likely to last just 5 minutes more. He then turned his attention to the massive slab of concrete, beneath which the students were trapped. Drawing in a deep, lung-expanding breath, he pursed his lips and directed a focused, icy stream of breath towards the trapped area. This wasn't just any breath. It was a blast of super-chilled air. As the frosty gale left his lips, it hit the heated area with a hiss, the temperature around the concrete slab visibly dropping. He could sense the intense heat wavering under the influence of his frigid breath. The immediate area around the students began to cool, the sweltering heat relenting under his powerful frosty exhalation. Clark was aware that this relief would be temporary. The reactor core was still a furnace of uncontrollable energy, relentlessly emitting waves of heat. But he hoped that this brief respite would provide the students some much-needed comfort. Hovering beside the teetering reactor core, Clark shifted his focus to the elevator shafts, crucial in the plan to reach the trapped students. In an instant, he propelled himself downwards, reaching the shaft with a speed that was nearly imperceptible to the human eye. Upon arrival, Clark closely examined the obstructed shaft. The elevator car was jammed, and debris littered the space, creating a hazardous barrier. Employing his superhuman vision, he scrutinized the layers of rubble, his eyes piercing through concrete and steel. He carefully mapped out a route, one that would allow him access without further jeopardizing the integrity of the concrete slab, under which the students were trapped. Once his plan was set, Clark repositioned himself several dozen feet above the shaft. He needed momentum for what he was about to do. With a deep breath, he leaned forward and dove down the shaft at an astonishing speed. As he descended, he became a human projectile, navigating the path he had mentally charted. He blasted through the debris and the stalled elevator car with precision, his movement a blur. Clark burst into the server room amid a swirling cloud of dust, his arrival marked by the rumble of dislodged debris. The room was surprisingly intact, likely designed to safeguard the invaluable supercomputers it housed. Without hesitation, Clark sprinted through the server level. His superhuman vision activated, he peered through the ceiling, mapping out the exact location of the trapped students and the steel door that confined them. In mere seconds, he positioned himself underneath their location. Hovering slightly off the ground, Clark focused the extraordinary power coursing within him. Concentrating intensely, he unleashed a burst of heat vision, the energy emitting from his eyes in a precise, controlled stream. The beam was a vibrant, incandescent force. He began to trace a large circle right outside the door where the students were trapped. He rested his hands just beneath the ceiling. His movements were meticulous, ensuring the integrity of his work. The concrete above, under the intense heat of his gaze, began to yield, severing along the path he marked. As the circle of concrete finally gave way, Clark was ready. He caught the heavy slab with ease. Gently, he lowered it to the server room floor, clearing the path for the students' rescue. Clark, with a sense of urgency, flew upward through the freshly created opening, arriving at the atrium level just outside the steel door. He realized the significance of his position. He was closer to the trapped students than any rescue team had managed to get. Before proceeding further, Clark quickly located a hefty steel beam among the debris. He lowered it through the hole he had cut, positioning it as a makeshift ladder. This would be crucial for the students' exit in the moments to come. Turning his attention to the steel door, Clark raised his voice, calling through the barrier. "I'm here to help you," he yelled. "I need you to all move away from the door." Using his superhuman vision, he watched through the steel as the students, initially startled, moved back with a mix of urgency and relief. Their movements were a dance of cautious hope and disbelief. However, their moment of reprieve was short-lived. Another explosion echoed from the reactor, louder and more ominous than before. Clark's gaze instantly shifted, his vision piercing through the layers of rubble to the reactor. One of the welds he had hastily made earlier had succumbed to the reactor's relentless assault. Time was running dangerously low. With the situation growing ever more critical, Clark steeled himself for his next move. Every second counted, and he was acutely aware of the precious lives hanging in the balance. He prepared to breach the steel door, ready to use his extraordinary abilities to bring the students to safety. 8. In the oppressive darkness that engulfed them, Emil Hamilton's eyes strained towards the faint outline of the steel door, their primary barrier to escape. The atmosphere in their confined space was thick with fear and anticipation. Each explosion, each vibration from outside, seemed to tighten the grip of their concrete prison, reducing their already limited space. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed through the darkness from the other side of the door. "Stay back! I'm cutting through!" The words were a beacon of hope, severing the despair that had settled over the group. Emil felt a surge of cautious relief, mixed with a pressing sense of urgency. He could sense from the shifting and groaning of the concrete around them that time was perilously short. The slab above them, already strained beyond its limits, was on the brink of collapse. They had mere minutes, if not seconds, before their shelter turned into their tomb. He turned to the students, his voice growing more steady. "Move back from the door, now," he instructed, trying to instill a sense of calm urgency. He herded them as far away from the door as the cramped space would allow, his mind fervently praying that the rescuers would break through in time. Emil's eyes widened in amazement as a subtle red glow began to illuminate the cramped space, casting a surreal light in the darkness. The glow intensified, highlighting the contours of their confined area. Then, the unimaginable happened. The steel of the door began to melt. A line, red and radiant, started to form, its luminous trail etching a rectangle along the edges of the formidable barrier. The sight was awe-inspiring. Whoever was on the other side was wielding a cutting tool like nothing Emil had ever seen or heard of. A laser of such intensity and precision that it defied his understanding of existing technology. The line grew into a perfect rectangle, glowing with an otherworldly light, the metal around it dripping away like molten lava. In less than 30 seconds, the task was complete. The cut-out steel rectangle slowly lowered outward, and a stream of light poured into their dark prison, a beacon of hope breaking through the despair. For the first time since the explosion, Emil could fully see the students around him. Their faces were streaked with dust, each line a testament to their ordeal. Their clothes were dirty and tattered, bearing the scars of their harrowing experience. But as the light reached their eyes, the despair that had clouded their expressions began to give way to hope. Their faces, though marred by the catastrophe, were now canvases of dawning relief and cautious optimism. As the light flooded their cramped space, a silhouette framed the doorway, a figure exuding strength and confidence. The man's presence brought an immediate sense of security. "Hurry," he instructed, his voice both understanding and urgent. He gestured towards the glowing edges of the neatly cut door. "Don't touch the sides." The warning was clear, and the students wasted no time. They filed out one by one. "Down," the man directed, pointing to a steel beam and a hole in the floor. "Help each other as much as possible." There was a sense of calm command in his voice, an assurance that lent them courage. Emil watched as the students quickly descended the beam, using it like a slide to reach the lower level. Their movements were swift. The man then turned to Emil, concern evident in his tone. "Can you get down with your arm like that?" he asked, eyeing the bandage and the protruding shard of glass. "Where is everyone else?" Emil asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "You're not alone in this, are you?" "Hurry, sir," the man urged again, his eyes scanning the unstable environment around them. Before Emil could process the situation further, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. The concrete slab overhead groaned, a clear sign it was about to give way. "Go now!" the man yelled. Without a second thought, Emil grasped the edge of the beam and slid down, trusting in the stranger's instructions. As he descended, the reality of their rescue, so improbable and yet so miraculously unfolding, began to sink in. Emil, now safely on the server level, looked up in awe. The figure he had seen, the one who had facilitated their incredible escape, was performing yet another extraordinary feat. The lone firefighter, with an ease that defied belief, lifted the massive steel rectangle, the same piece he had meticulously cut from the door. He lowered it back over the hole between the floors, effectively sealing it. It ensured their safety in the server level, away from the chaos above. Around him, Emil noticed the group of students, their faces a mirror of his own astonishment. They were all caught in a moment of disbelief, marveling at the actions of this mysterious savior. In that moment of relative safety, Emil thought of the alien ship in the lower lab. Hope flickered as he remembered a stairwell by the server room, possibly his route to the lab. He realized he might yet access the ship, even in the pandemonium at Star Labs. With a newfound sense of purpose, Emil began to navigate through the server room. His arm, wounded but forgotten in the adrenaline of the moment, was a minor hindrance as he moved with determination. 9. With the students now securely tucked away in the server level, a wave of relief washed over Clark. But this brief respite was quickly overshadowed by the intensifying chaos around him. The ground trembled violently, mimicking the ferocity of an earthquake, and he braced himself, focusing on the task at hand. He turned towards the reactor tower, his senses heightened to the impending danger. Suddenly, a massive piece of the concrete slab, splintered and jagged, broke free. It plummeted down, crashing into the exact spot where the students had been just moments before. The impact was thunderous, sending a shower of smaller debris scattering in all directions. Through the chaos, Clark's penetrating vision caught sight of another critical failure. His second weld on the reactor's support struts had ripped apart. The very foundations of the structure crumbled under the strain, and the reactor, pulsating with uncontrollable solar energy, began its descent anew. Now, with the students out of harm's way, Clark knew it was time to address the reactor head-on. No longer restrained by the fear of harming the trapped students, he prepared to unleash his full capabilities. Gathering all the power within him, he coiled his body like a spring, ready to launch. In a burst of speed, Clark catapulted upward with breathtaking speed, fists clenched, hurtling towards the reactor like a human missile. He smashed through the concrete slab, his body a blur in unstoppable motion, leaving a trail of shattered concrete. The slab crumbled under his immense force, turning into a cloud of dust and debris as he zeroed in on his target. The world around him seemed to slow as he emerged outside, directly under the menacing shadow of the reactor tower. In that split second, with the reactor plummeting towards the Earth, Clark extended his hands, ready for the impact. His palms met the 3-story tall structure, the contact sending a shockwave of energy rippling through the air. His fingers, with a strength that bordered on the impossible, clenched around the metallic exterior of the reactor. The vibrations from the unstable core pulsated wildly, transmitting down his arms which were taut with effort. His grip was unyielding, his fingers digging into the metal, countering the immense weight of the reactor with a force that was both fearsome and magnificent. In this moment, Clark was a force of nature, single-handedly halting the descent of a structure that threatened untold devastation. The enormity of his action, the sheer display of power and determination, underscoring his extraordinary abilities. As Clark exerted his strength to lift the immense reactor tower, he felt the staggering weight resist his efforts, its massive bulk fighting against the change in momentum. The tower's structural integrity was compromised. Further down, he could sense it beginning to fracture and disintegrate under the strain. Reacting with lightning-fast reflexes, Clark released his hold and repositioned himself at the tower's center of gravity. His movements were a blur, a display of superhuman agility and speed. He grasped the tower again, this time at its most balanced point, ready to resume the Herculean task of lifting. Now, Clark found himself directly outside the bulbous area of the reactor chamber, the heart of the fusion reaction. What lay within was akin to a miniature sun, a blistering, uncontained energy source. The outer barrier of the chamber had mostly crumbled away, exposing the volatile reaction just a few feet from where he held the reactor. Gritting his teeth, Clark began to push upward with all his might, his entire being focused on the task. The reactor, an unwieldy mass of metal and energy, responded slowly to his efforts, inching upwards under his guidance. Upward, he strained, moving the reactor away from the ground. All around him, the situation was critical. Arcs of energy, relentless and uncontrolled, lashed out from the reactor. Dozens of plasma bolts struck out indiscriminately every second, hitting the remnants of the Star Labs building and even reaching the surrounding structures. The entire disaster zone was under siege from these violent energy discharges. As Clark exerted his incredible strength to lift the reactor tower, he could see the panicked crowd in the evacuation area. They were pushing back, seeking refuge further away from the unfolding disaster. The fear and urgency in their movements were clear. The sensation in his hands, arms, and throughout his body was almost overwhelming. The crackling plasma energy from the reactor coursed down his arms, arcing across his body in a display of raw power. The energy was intense, coursing through him with a strange yet invigorating sensation. It was as if he was channeling the very force of the reactor itself. With a deep understanding of the stakes at hand, Clark knew he had to get the reactor away from the city. The potential explosion would not only endanger countless more lives, but would also decimate the remaining structure of Star Labs and likely cause extensive damage to the surrounding area. He couldn't let that happen. Drawing upon every ounce of his otherworldly strength, Clark pushed the reactor upward. The momentum began to shift under his control. He hovered above the disaster site, the tower in his grasp, becoming a symbol of hope against the backdrop of chaos. His ascent started slowly, but as he pushed harder, his speed increased, growing into an unstoppable force. Clark set his sights on the distant horizon, beyond the waterfront and over the West River. Lois, standing in the alleyway with Jimmy, could hardly believe the scene unfolding before them. The lone firefighter, whom they had watched perform one miraculous feat after another, now defied all logic and reason. He hovered in midair, bearing the colossal weight of the reactor tower above his head. Even from their distant vantage point, Lois could see the visible strain as he shouldered the massive structure. As he gained altitude, the reactor's glow intensified, radiating a dangerous light. Plasma bolts, destructive and indiscriminate, erupted from it, striking the buildings and the ground below. Lois watched, her journalist's instinct overtaken by sheer awe, as he rose above the city's skyline, gaining speed. His acceleration was breathtaking. In moments, he became a mere blur against the sky. the reactor glowing menacingly in his grip. It was like watching a catastrophic shooting star, a streak of fiery light against the afternoon sky as he made his way over the West River. Then, with a suddenness that took everyone's breath away, the reactor exploded. A massive ball of light and flames erupted high above the river, a spectacular and terrifying sight. The people around Lois gasped in shock, instinctively stepping back as the sky lit up with the explosion. Debris, smoke, and fire rained down over the water, painting a dramatic picture of destruction contained. The shockwave hit them a second later, a deep, resonant vibration that Lois felt to her very core. She stood there, rooted to the spot, utterly speechless, her gaze fixed on the sky. Around her, the crowd mirrored her reaction, all eyes turned upward in a collective, silent vigil. They were united in awe, in anticipation, each person processing the enormity of what had just occurred. The only sound that pierced the silence was the steady clicking of Jimmy's camera. His fingers worked reflexively, capturing each moment, preserving this slice of history through his lens. Then, from the dissipating cloud of smoke and debris, a speck emerged. It streaked out from the top of the cloud, arcing gracefully up and then swooping down in a controlled flight. The figure skimmed mere feet above the water of the West River, flying with a speed and intensity that was almost unfathomable. He was heading straight back towards them, towards the wreckage of Star Labs. The crowd, including Lois, let out a collective gasp, a sound that was part sigh of relief, part amazement. The man, their savior of the day, rocketed past them with an incredible velocity, gradually slowing to a hover just before touching down amid the rubble of the devastated building. Lois watched, her heart pounding as he knelt down among the debris. With ease, he lifted a large steel slab, as if it were made of cardboard, and casually tossed it aside, uncovering an opening that led to the level below. Next to her, Jimmy's camera continued its relentless work, capturing the aftermath, the hero, the moment. Lois knew these images would tell a story that words could hardly do justice. As the lone firefighter knelt among the ruins, he extended an arm into the gap below. The onlookers held their breath, and then, to their collective shock and delight, a student emerged, grasping his hand and climbing out from the depths of the rubble. One by one, in a steady procession, the students followed suit, each emerging into the light and moving towards the command center. The crowd of first responders and spectators erupted into a spontaneous cheer. The sound was a powerful wave of celebration and relief, reverberating through the air. It was more than applause. It was a chorus of rejoicing, a collective outpouring of wonder and gratitude for the miracle they were witnessing. First responders sprang into action, rushing towards the students. Some offered immediate medical assistance, while others provided comforting embraces or words of reassurance. The scene was a vibrant tableau of care and humanity, a reminder of the resilience and compassion that emerges in the face of adversity. Lois, caught up in the moment, took a deep breath to steady herself against the brick facade of the nearby building. As she did, something caught her eye. A pair of shoes, incongruously neat and clean amidst the chaos. Curious, she bent down to pick one up, examining it closely. Her gaze then drifted back to the lone firefighter, still tirelessly helping the students to safety. A puzzle piece clicked in her mind as she held the shoe, an inexplicable connection forming. 11. Emil Hamilton, his heart pounding, stumbled into the secret underground lab. His breath came in ragged gasps, a mixture of exhaustion and urgency driving him forward. The dim emergency lights cast a soft, reddish glow, lending an eerie atmosphere to the room. He halted abruptly, his eyes widening in disbelief. The alien ship, the centerpiece of his countless hours of research and fascination, was gone. The pedestal that had once cradled the otherworldly vessel stood empty. A surge of anger welled up inside Emil. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles whitening as a scream of frustration and rage tore from his throat. Desperate for answers, Emil rushed to a computer terminal, his fingers trembling as he tapped the screen. A wave of relief washed over him when he saw that the backup power was still operational, keeping these critical systems alive. He rapidly thumbed through the screens, navigating to the security footage of the lab. Selecting the timestamp he needed, a record from several hours earlier. Emil braced himself. The footage began to play, and Emil watched in mounting horror. A small, efficient crew of individuals dressed in black had entered the lab. They moved with stealth and precision, equipped with tools and a clear purpose. Methodically, they dismantled the pedestal and used a mechanical arm to transfer the alien ship onto a specialized device. Then, just as systematically, they rolled it out of the room, disappearing with the invaluable artifact. Overwhelmed by a mix of shock and fury, Emil slammed his fist down onto the glass screen of the terminal. The impact was fierce, and the screen shattered under the force, splintering into a web of cracks. As the last of the students emerged from the rubble, Clark surveyed the scene. The first responders were in full swing, tending to the students with care and efficiency. He also noticed journalists, previously cautious, now rushing towards him, their concerns for safety momentarily forgotten in the wake of the dramatic rescue. Clark understood it was time for him to leave. The situation was stabilizing, and his presence was no longer necessary. But he allowed himself one final moment to absorb the scene around him. Yes, there was devastation, a tangible sense of loss and sorrow. But amidst that, there was also a profound sense of triumph. The immediate danger had passed, and against all odds, lives had been saved. His gaze then fell on the reunited family. The little girl still clung to her father, her small arms wrapped tightly around him, while he held the mother close. Clark's attention shifted to the wreckage and debris. He saw what he was looking for. With a gentle lift, he soared 100 feet away, landing briefly beside a pile of rubble. There, partially hidden, lay the purple teddy bear. He picked it up with care, then took off once again, gliding gracefully towards the little girl and her family. Clark landed softly in front of the family, who looked at him with a mixture of shock and awe. Gently, he pushed back the visor of his firefighting helmet, revealing his face. His gaze met the little girl's eyes, conveying a warmth and kindness that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the day. With a careful hand, he brushed off the concrete dust that had settled on the purple teddy bear. Holding it out to the little girl, he said gently, "I think you may have dropped this back there. Does it have a name?" The little girl's face lit up, her eyes shining with a mix of happiness and relief. "Her name is Princess Bumbleberry," she replied, her voice filled with affection for her lost and found companion. "Of course it is," Clark responded with a warm, understanding smile. Gratefully, the little girl took Princess Bumbleberry from him, embracing the teddy bear with all the love of a child reunited with her cherished friend. Clark looked at the family, his expression soft and reassuring. "You've shown incredible strength today," he said gently. "Stay safe." Clark stepped back and gently pushed off the ground. The rush of wind against his face and the feeling of weightlessness as he ascended was both exhilarating and freeing. As he climbed higher, his speed surged phenomenally, transforming the disaster site and the city into a distant, colorful blur. Mixed emotions swirled within him: relief that the immediate danger had passed, sadness for the losses, and a burgeoning sense of trepidation about how this day's actions might shape his destiny. The sprawling cityscape soon yielded to the vastness of the serene blue sky, where above the clouds, the world seemed untouched by the chaos below. As he soared higher into the atmosphere, Clark embraced the pure joy of flight, momentarily setting aside every other thought to simply exist in the vast, peaceful expanse.